in, but we'll go ahead and get started and run through some of our ground rules and webinar logistics while people are still logging in. I think this is something that most of you are used to at this point, but we still want to run through it. Thank you everyone for being here. This is a meeting of the 5th Management Plans Work Group. My name is Natalie Mast. I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Maggie Martin to run through the logistics and ground rules for this meeting. So Maggie.
Hi everyone, this is Maggie Martin. I'm a management plan specialist here at ADWR, and I'm going to be going over the webinar logistics today. Please remain muted unless you are speaking. If you would like to speak, please type your name in the chat, or if you prefer, you can type your comments and questions into the chat and we'll read those aloud instead. Please make sure you send your messages to everyone in the chat so that they do not get missed. If you have any technical difficulties throughout the meeting, you can contact the ADWR Help Desk. Their phone number and email are here on the screen. And this meeting and chat will be recorded. Next slide, please. Most of you are familiar with our new Google form questionnaires. We have been utilizing them to provide another opportunity for stakeholder input. They have questions regarding the concepts that are presented at each subgroup meeting, and there's also space for general feedback as well. On the slide, you can see the link for today's questionnaire, and we will also be including that link in the chat box. Questions are optional in the survey, so you can choose what you would like to provide feedback on. If you would like to provide feedback, we ask that you do so by December 30th. Next slide. Lastly, I'm going to be covering these question slides and timers. We know that we cover a lot of information in these meetings, and we wanted to make sure that we are providing enough time for you all to develop your questions and comments. So on certain slides, we've incorporated these timers to ensure that we are pausing and providing enough time for input. And on the screen, you can see an example of that timer here. And Natalie, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thank you, Maggie. So, as I said, welcome. This is a meeting of the 5th Management Plans Work Group. This is actually our last public meeting day for ADWR of the year. So we've come a really long way in 2020. There is an RPAG meeting this afternoon, but this is the last 5th Management Plans Work Group meeting, our 5th Management Plans meeting of the year. So we really appreciate you all being along for the ride with us over the last year and a half. And hopefully today will be an interesting meeting. My name is Natalie Mast. I am the AMA Director responsible for the management plans here at ADWR. You also just heard from Maggie Martin. Maggie is going to be helping out with some of our presentation today and also will be reading anything for the webinar that gets written into the chat. We do have McKenna Welsh on the webinar today. She's kind of helping run the technical side of the webinar, helping with muting or unmuting people. And we also have Amanda Long here who will also be helping out with some of the presentation today. So as I've mentioned before, these meetings, this work is very much a team effort. And I really appreciate the three of them, McKenna, Maggie, and Amanda, helping out today and really throughout this whole process. They put a lot of work into all of this. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is our agenda for today. We will be running through just a very quick timeline for the 5th Management Plans, kind of updating on what all we have going on, where we are in our process. We will provide updates from each of our subgroups and what our next steps are for each of those groups. And we'll also kind of give a preview of what our next phase of this group and what our next phase of developing the 5th Management Plans looks like. We have a lot of ideas that we've been developing for drafting the 5th Management Plans, for what those 5th Management Plans will look like. And we're really excited to share some of those ideas with all of you today. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I'll go ahead and jump right into kind of a quick timeline update. Next slide, please. There we go. So back last year in 2019, we established this kind of framework for concurrent processes of completing the fourth management plans by the end of 2020 and concurrently developing the fifth management plans with the goal of adopting those fifth management plans by the end of 2022 in order that those conservation programs in those plans could be effective by 2025. So I'm really happy to say that we are still on track and still working toward meeting this timing. For the fourth management plans, we completed the adoption of the Phoenix Fourth Management Plan earlier this year. The Pinal and Santa Cruz Fourth Management Plans, we did receive requests for rehearing and review for both of those adoptions, but we will have responses out to both of those before the end of the year. So the final adoptions for those will move forward by the end of the year. So we're really excited that it's a big milestone for us to be completing those fourth management plans by the end of 2020. We have also been doing a lot of work in this fifth management plans work process to work through the development of the fifth management plans. If we could go to the next slide, please. So the progress that we've made under this work group through the fifth management plans development process has been really well documented on our fifth management plans concepts page. You can see the link to that underneath the title of this slide. I would really encourage you all to, if you haven't already checked out that page, please visit it. We are continually updating it with each subgroup meeting, with each new concept, with each new discussion that we have. So we are working to try to keep that updated, make sure that it's a really relevant source of information for these meetings. So yeah, the progress that we've made through this group has been really well documented on that page. And we do have a timeline here that we're working under. So in order to adopt the fifth management plans by the end of 2022, we really need to spend the bulk of next year, the bulk of 2021, writing those plans, actually drafting those plans, putting these things down on paper. So in order to focus our staff time and energy on that drafting process, we do intend to largely wrap up a lot of the subgroup meetings, fifth management plan work groups meetings around the first quarter of 2021. So we will be concurrently writing the plans for all 5 AMAs. There's a lot of kind of overlap between the chapters. So we'll be writing kind of one chapter at a time rather than doing one plan at a time. And we will be working through kind of the particularities of each individual AMA during that drafting process. We will still hold work group meetings, subgroup meetings, but more kind of on an as needed basis to finalize the details of the conservation programs that we've been discussing, and also to provide updates on, and request feedback on draft language and other details that may need to be worked out. I will go into more detail on our plans for this process later in the meeting. But for now, we can go ahead and go to the next slide, and I will pause for any questions or comments that you all may have on this timeline, on the process, on today's agenda, or what this process might look like going forward.
Thank you, Natalie. I have a question here from Terry Sue in the chat box. She's wondering, will there be any opportunity to change concepts after the first quarter of 2021?
Sure. Thank you, Terry Sue. So that first quarter thing is certainly not a hard deadline by any means. We will continue working with the individual subgroups, with the individual stakeholders, developing the various concepts that we've worked through. That said, at some point we do need to write the plans. So pushing things much past that first quarter is going to make it really difficult to allow enough time to develop those concepts to actually incorporate those into the plans. So there's not a hard deadline there, but there is a little bit of a time crunch and a lot of reason to try to get things in and start developing those concepts as soon as possible.
Thank you, Natalie. Stephanie is wondering if this work group will still meet next year.
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie. So over the last year and a half, this group has met, this particular group has met about quarterly. Each of the subgroups have met quarterly or maybe a little bit more frequently. We will continue to have both this kind of combined work group, meetings of this combined work group and meetings of the individual subgroups, but they're going to be kind of at a different pace. So in the first quarter, we'll kind of continue that same pace because we still do have a lot of details, a lot of work to complete in those discussions. But beyond that, we're hoping to move to a little bit more of an as needed type pace where we'll meet when we have updates or if there's additional details or additional discussions that need to be had. And we'll also meet to provide previews and reviews of draft language, different components of those plans as they're actually written.
Thank you, Natalie. Nothing additional in the chat box right now.
Great, thank you. Good questions, thank you. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead. There will be opportunity, as I said earlier, we will provide a little bit more detail on our plans for the drafting, our plans for this work group a little bit later in the presentation. But for now, we'll go ahead and move on into the subgroup updates. So next slide, please. So you all are here. This is the management plans work group. As we've repeatedly reiterated throughout this process, our kind of guiding principle for developing these management plans is contained in the statutes. The statute indicates that the management plans should contain conservation programs designed to achieve reductions in withdrawals of groundwater. This is kind of our guiding principle for all of our conservation program development, is that reductions in withdrawals of groundwater. I know probably all of you at this point have heard me say that phrase 100 times, but it's worth pointing back to that this is really kind of our critical piece here, our critical checkbox, if you will, for these plans and for designing these programs. And this group, this management plans work group, was created last year to help advise ADWR on how we might do this. So this is our ADWR-led stakeholder forum for the development of those conservation programs in the fifth management plans. And we really do appreciate the engagement, the participation of all of you throughout this process. We have gotten a lot of really detailed feedback, and we really appreciate all of the time that all of you have dedicated. We know it's been a lot over the last year and a half, so thank you for contributing to this process. We laid out these goals at the beginning of the process of assessing the existing conservation programs, updating our existing management strategies, and developing new management strategies. And we are very close to achieving these goals. As I mentioned a little bit before, and as I'll talk about more later, we will continue to utilize feedback from this group kind of as we move into this next phase of drafting these plans. And we do hope to continue a lot of that engagement and continue a lot of those relationships that we've built to make sure that we're accurately reflecting the things that we've developed through this process in the actual text of those plans. So we'll move to the next slide, please, and we'll provide a little bit of an update on the municipal subgroup. So this group in particular has covered a lot of ground. So the way we have this slide organized is by program. So under the non-per capita conservation program, this is the municipal BMP program. There has just been an incredible amount of work done and progress made in developing what this program will look like for the fifth management plans. So the approach we kind of took with the non-per capita program was assessing each individual BMP and updating that BMP list, assessing the BMP categories, and we're actually still in the process of developing and discussing a new planning category for the non-per capita program. We heard from a lot of different stakeholders, and AMWA specifically presented a specific proposal for what the fifth management plan non-per capita program might look like. We really appreciate the detail that AMWA put into that proposal. And we discussed the components of that proposal, and along with other ideas and feedback that we were hearing, to kind of develop a consensus proposal on the BMPs and the tiers and the point structure for the fifth management plans. We certainly have some additional discussions to do related to the non-per capita program. You see in the next steps column that we will continue discussing that new planning category, and we'll need to have additional discussions to kind of finalize what those targets and tiers will be for the non-per capita program. For the GPCD program, we have really just started getting into the nitty-gritty of our discussions for this program. We have had some initial discussions for GPCD, but we have a lot more work to do here. We heard from the regulated community and did recognize the need for updates and a change in methodology in how the targets for the GPCD program are established. So at our last meeting, we did present some initial directions for the GPCD program in order to get some feedback on whether those kind of very, very initial ideas might be workable, how we might move this forward. What we've really heard from people, the regulated community, the water providers, is that the goals that we might have for the GPCD program for how we might move this program into the fifth management plans is that, so obviously ADWR has a goal of increasing conservation. This is our reductions in withdrawals of groundwater. This applies to everyone. So the goal for the program would be to increase conservation, but in a way that establishes realistic, achievable targets for the individual providers. Also, we've heard a lot of confusion about the existing program, so we want to do that in a way that is streamlined and understandable. There's also a lot of concern about the existing structure not being adaptable enough to the specific characteristics of individual providers and how those characteristics change over time. So we want to make sure that the program moving forward is customizable, adaptable to those specific characteristics, whether it be residential and non-residential or other components of the things that make up a city and how those things change over time. So those are big goals, but I think we have really good ideas for reflecting all of those goals in an updated program moving forward. So we certainly have our work cut out for us there. We'll have to continue those conversations. And we really appreciate all of the feedback that we've received so far, both in the work group meetings and in some offline conversations we've had with various providers. So we will continue to discuss the GPCD program, and hopefully we'll move forward toward a proposal for that program in upcoming meetings. We've also heard, in addition to the GPCD program, we've also heard some requests for a program, something along the lines of a hybrid program. So residential GPCD and non-residential BMPs, excuse me. This type of structure already actually exists in the alternative conservation program. So, but the alternative conservation program has historically had very low participation. So something we'd like to consider in our upcoming meetings and moving forward in this process is updates to that alternative conservation program, having more parallels to the BMP program, more parallels to the GPCD program, so that that program is a little bit more understandable and maybe applicable to a broader range of providers. So our next meeting for the municipal subgroup is going to be in February 10th. I believe that meeting will be scheduled for 1 p.m. And maybe one of my staff can correct me if I got that time wrong. In any case, all of our upcoming meetings for the next quarter are already on ADWR's public meetings calendar, so you can check for those. And we also include all of our upcoming meetings in our meeting announcement and reminder emails. So please keep an eye on those emails for upcoming meeting dates and any updates to those dates. We can move to the next slide, and I'll go ahead and pause here for any questions or comments on the general work group update that I provided and on the municipal subgroup.
Heather here is wondering where we can find more details on the alternative conservation program.
Thanks, Heather. That's a great question. The alternative conservation program is contained in the existing management plans. Probably your source of the most detail on it will be in the third management plans because there was such low participation in it, it was kind of neglected in the fourth management plans. So the most detail you'll be able to find on the alternative conservation program will be in the third management plans. And perhaps in our next municipal meeting, we can provide a little bit more detail, a detailed overview of what that program looks like currently and how it might be updated to better align with the BMP and GPCD programs.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm not seeing any additional questions or comments right now.
All right. Great, Maggie. Thank you. So what we'll move into now is just a quick update on the industrial subgroup. So this industrial subgroup has only met once, way back at the beginning in September of 2019. At that meeting, it was recommended that we have subsector level type breakout groups. So we did create the turf breakout group that has been very active since that time. We have heard some suggestions to have this industrial subgroup meet to discuss the mining conservation programs and the conservation program for cooling towers. So we would really like to hear from all of you if there are any other suggestions for things that we might cover in an industrial subgroup meeting. and we will work to get a meeting of that group on the schedule for the coming months. So with that, I will go ahead and move on to Maggie, who is going to provide us an update on the turf subgroup.
Thank you, Natalie. So in the previous turf meetings, we detailed the existing conservation programs and created a list of goals, needs, and wants for the fifth management plan. The turf program for golf courses is incredibly complex and can be difficult to understand. So along with equity, feasibility, and reducing withdrawals of groundwater, part of our goals with this program was to increase transparency and make this program easier to understand. I'm going to give a brief recap of our last meetings, but keep in mind that we haven't discussed golf concepts since August. We wanted to allow time to discuss topics with stakeholders and also to allow time for non-golf discussions. We have had 3 meetings since the last turf breakout. In the first meeting, we had a guest presentation from Dr. Paul Brown, who is a University of Arizona Extension Specialist. He provided us with an update of an expanded analysis of turf water duties, including updated consumptive use information. And this information is what we use in the development of an updated allotment calculation method. We then described the process that we took to develop an allotment calculation method for the turf conservation program for golf courses, including how we use the information from Dr. Brown and the multiple methods that were considered. Finally, in this first meeting, we introduced a proposed method for the allotment calculation. This method centered on splitting golf courses into 2 categories based on acres per hole. In the second meeting, we continued discussion of the proposed method, including how that method might look in each AMA and how we might modify the method to fit each AMA. We also introduced a calculator to help understand this proposal. The proposal and calculator are located on the 5MP Concepts webpage. McKenna actually posted that here in the chat box for your easy access if you'd like to check that out. Most of the work we have done so far in this group has been golf course related, but we have since started introducing discussions on other turf related items, including potential modifications to the effluent adjustment, discussions on flex accounts, as well as allotment additions. And in our third meeting, we discussed ways we might update the conservation program for non-golf facilities. We introduced an idea that we are calling use-dependent application rates, which would update the way that the maximum annual allotment is calculated. This method involves different application rates for different types of turf. We proposed 2 turf categories, athletic turf and ornamental turf. Using data from the non-golf turf-related facilities, we looked at several different scenarios of how we might split the application rates across the different turf facilities. We discussed 2 of those potential options in our last meeting. In future meetings, we will continue discussion of effluent adjustments, allotment additions, flex accounts, modifications to the non-golf turf facility program, and we'll continue to talk about the golf allotment method proposal. And again, all of the potential changes to the turf programs are still in draft, and we welcome any feedback and suggestions on any of these concepts here. Our next meeting is February 24th, and I believe that one is also at 1 o'clock. But again, those are all available on our meetings, public meetings calendar on the website. And we can take questions from you all now on industrial subgroup updates. All right, I know that was a lot of information there. I don't see any questions or comments in the chat box, but please feel free to send them our way if you can, if anything comes to mind later on. And for now, I will pass it to Amanda.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give the update on the agricultural subgroup. So far in this subgroup, we have discussed data on the BMP and BASE programs, and introduced two potential new concepts for the 5th Management Plan Agricultural Conservation Program. So the first is tiers for the BMP program, and the second is an alternative conservation program that we are calling the Integrated Farm Program. So the tiers in the BMP program could be similar to what is done in the municipal program. So different tiers would have different targets. And the integrated farm program would allow multiple rights under the same allotment, under the same owner operator, to combine their allotment and provide flexibility on where that allotment may be used. This program would also have a cut to the aquifer. We have had one agricultural subgroup meeting since the last full workgroup meeting. At this meeting, we discussed how multiple conservation programs, so the base or default allotment program, the BMP program, and the integrated farm program could fit together in a 5th management plan structure. So one of the driving forces behind the creation of the BMP program was the administrative burden on farming multiple rights. The integrated farm program could kind of occupy this middle ground space between the base and BMP programs. So it could address many of the administrative burden concerns, but also have that simplicity of an allotment-based program. This middle ground alternative could also help to strengthen the conservation and credibility of the BMP program by only including farms that are using the best conservation, the best efficiency infrastructure, and the best management practices, and focusing the water use on the best and most productive pieces of land. At the last subgroup meeting, we also had a presentation by the Ag Collaborators Group. So this is a group of producers, independent well owners, representatives of irrigation districts, staff of agricultural organizations, and elected officials. Members of this group are people you've heard from before. They have been very vocal throughout this subgroup, and they asked for a forum from ADWR to allow for a more in-depth discussion of complex issues and concerns about the management plans. So these are issues, again, that they have expressed previously throughout this agricultural subgroup meeting process. So as a result of ADWR continually trying to improve our processes, has met with this group throughout the past few months. And at the last subgroup meeting, a representative from this collaborators group did give a full overview of the topics that were discussed. So at the last meeting, we also introduced some additional BMP analysis that ADWR is working on, where in the past our analysis has compared rights that are in the BMP or BASE program. This new analysis would look at only rights that have been in the BMP program and what their water use looked like before and after they entered the program. This new analysis will provide useful information for both the department and the regulated community. At the last subgroup meeting, we also introduced the continuation of the Agricultural Water Conservation Best Management Plans Advisory, or Best Management Practices, sorry, Advisory Committee, which out in the next slide. So at the next subgroup meeting, which is on January 27th, and forgive me, I don't know what time it's at. And there we will continue to discuss the additional BMP analysis that I just talked about, continue discussion on the new concepts, and also have an update from the BMP committee. And as Maggie and Natalie mentioned, the date and time for that can be found on the public calendar. All right, so the Agricultural Water Conservation BMP Advisory Committee was originally established in 2002, and it was to go through the end of the 4th management plans. On November 6th, a new executive order was released that continued this committee through the adoption of the final groundwater management plans. The new order also requires an additional irrigation district representative. So the role of this committee is to advise the director on the BMP program. The committee is chaired by Pinal AMA farmer Scott Riggins. There has so far been one meeting on December 9th. This meeting covered the purpose, scope, and history of the BMP program. Having a dedicated website space for this committee in the future, but for now, all the information, including previous meeting the BMP Advisory Committee and the share a lot of topics and are very connected. So the plan is for the discussions and recommendations from the BMP Advisory Committee to eventually be brought into this subgroup meeting process. So with that, I will take questions. I can move my mouse to the right screen. There we go. Oh, thank you, McKenna. So the egg subgroup meeting is at 10 a.m. on January 27th.
And I'll also just chime in here. I think we have a couple people from that ag stakeholder group, the collaborators group, on the call. I'd encourage any of you to speak up and chime in if you have any comments or additions or anything that we missed here.
Amanda, this is Patrick with the Arizona Farm and Ranch Group.
Hey, Patrick.
I just wanted to say I think you covered it well. We sincerely appreciate the work that the department is doing on this matter. I think we've made some big leaps and bounds on some of the issues working in the smaller subgroup, and look forward to continued work. And I think we're on a good path. And so thank you for that.
Thanks, Patrick.
Amanda, I am not seeing any questions or comments in the chat box for you right now.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. So I'll go ahead and move on to Safe Field. So in previous meetings for the Safe Field technical subgroup, we have discussed the annual components of the Safe Field calculation and potential methods for looking at Safe Field in the long term. Since the last full work group meeting, we have had one Safe Field meeting where we proposed a method of looking at Safe Field in the long term and updated the overdraft dashboard to include that proposal for all the AMAs. This method is a combination of methods. It's a short-term 3-year running average of artificial components and a long-term 20-year running average of natural components. Safe Field is very, very complex and therefore can be quite difficult to talk about and communicate the status of. So at this meeting, we also used a method of communicating the status of Safe Field, which I will provide an overview for you in the next slide. In the next subgroup meeting, we will finalize the annual and long-term methodology and continue discussion of the proposed communication strategy. And that meeting is on March the 10th. Okay, so I know this is all a lot to look at, but I'm going to walk through this for you here line by line. So we introduced this at our last Safe Field subgroup meeting as a method of communicating Safe Field. This is meant as a method that would be for a more technical or water-informed audience. It is a combination of a few methods since no one metric can really adequately express what the status of Safe Field is in each AMA. We did get a lot of feedback that a communication strategy should not be entirely quantitative or entirely qualitative. So this method is a hybrid of both. So before I go through this line by line, just a couple of things to keep in mind. This is very much a draft version. It was created to illustrate this proposed method, but this table does not yet include the changes that were discussed in the annual components. And it uses a proposed long-term method that we think we are very close to consensus on, but we'll still need to continue to discuss in the technical subgroup. And then the final thing to keep in mind is that this is a static analysis. So you can see that the table is divided by color. The differences in color will help to categorize the different metrics that are similar to each other, and then ones that should be read together. Also, one more thing, I guess not the final thing yet, but Safe Yield is AMA specific, and in fact, it's not the goal at all of the Pinal AMA. So although the AMAs are all displayed here on one table, this is not meant to be a comparison of the AMAs. All right, so the first metric is annual, and this, using the raw data, this metric is the amount of years that are in overdraft versus not in overdraft. So this is an X if there are more years in overdraft than not in overdraft, and otherwise it is a check. So this is a strategy that has been used in past management plans. It is an important metric, but not something that we can kind of use on its own to determine the status of Safe Yield. So you can see here on that first line that all of the AMAs have more years in overdraft than not. So the next 5 metrics, so the dark gray and the blue, are all related to the long-term analysis and uses the proposed long-term method in the table. So the first item in this section is the long-term status. This is whether or not the most recent year of the long-term analysis is in overdraft or not. So we have discussed the long-term analysis over several Safe Yield technical subgroup meetings. The current proposal, which I mentioned earlier, does have quite a bit of support. It uses a long-term 20-year running average of natural components and a short-term 3-year running average of artificial components. So the natural components, things such as stream bed recharge and mountain front recharge, whereas the artificial components include things such as sector demand. So this line item is an X if the most recent year of the proposed long-term analysis is in overdraft, and it is a check otherwise. In our preliminary analysis, you can see here that only the Tucson AMA is not in overdraft in the most recent year of the long-term analysis. So the next item we're calling long-term directionality. This is the direction of overdraft in the last 3 years of the long-term analysis. So in other words, it is whether or not overdraft is increasing or decreasing in the most recent years. So this is a check if overdraft is decreasing, and it is an X if overdraft is increasing. So a check here does not necessarily mean that the AMA is not in a state of overdraft, but it might indicate that there has been some improvements made towards Safe Yield. It doesn't mean that that improvement will continue, and it doesn't mean that the AMA is in Safe Yield, just that the AMA is decreasing their overdraft in that time period and maybe moving towards Safe Yield or maintaining Safe Yield. So for example, the Santa Cruz AMA, although in a state of overdraft, they seem to be making some improvements towards the goal. So the next 3 metrics here in blue are kind of a different version of the same metric, answering the question that we get really quite often, which is how far are we from Safe Yield? And these 3 metrics should be read together. So the first one is called single year overdraft. So this is the volume of overdraft in the most recent year of the long-term analysis. So this is the amount it would take to not be in a state of overdraft in the most recent year. To provide a little bit more context for this, this number is also showed as a % of total water demand. So that's the next metric there. So this is the single year overdraft volume of the long-term analysis as a % of total demand. And then finally in this group, we have a number, we also have this overdraft number shown as a % of groundwater demand. So the single year overdraft of the long-term analysis as a % of groundwater demand. So these three metrics, all in blue, are meant to be looked at together. So for example, here you'll see that the volume of water looks really quite large for the Phoenix AMA, but looking at the total demand metric, it is a smaller percentage of their total demand. Whereas the volume in the Santa Cruz AMA is quite small, but the percentage of total groundwater demand is significantly higher. So this final section, purple, includes some narrative. The first is the outlook, which seeks to address the second portion of the statutory language of safe yield, which is the thereafter maintain portion. So the goal is not only to reach safe yield, but also to maintain it into the future. So this metric lists the high-level potential issues to achieving and maintaining safe yield in the future. So for example, in the Tucson AMA, safe yield in the future might be greatly impacted by the availability of Colorado River water. The last item is called the long-term status, and this seeks to answer kind of the what does this all mean question. It shows a high-level summary of the metric table and the long-term status of safe yield in each of the AMAs. So for example, in the Santa Cruz AMA, it is not at safe yield, and the AMA is very quite sensitive to sensitive and significant drought type conditions. So again, this communication metrics table is meant to be catered to technical and water professionals. We have introduced it once at our last safe yield subgroup. The structure of this method is what we want to introduce you to today, and we will finalize the annual and long-term methods in this subgroup and then update the table with that information. So I know that was a whole lot to take in, but this is something that we are accepting and hoping to receive feedback from you all on. And we can go ahead and take questions on safe yield.
Thanks, Amanda. I have a question here for you from Melinda. She's wondering, in percent of groundwater demand by total demand, does total demand mean municipal, agricultural, and industrial demands?
Thanks, Melinda. So the total demand is all the sectors, and it is all water demand from all water sources.
Thanks, Amanda. Question here from, or rather a comment from E. Helper. Could you elaborate on the sensitivity to drought comment? Why is it only applied to the Santa Cruz AMA?
Sure, thank you. And Natalie, if you want to expand on this a little bit, but in the Santa Cruz AMA, there are really quite shallow basins, and so therefore it's extremely sensitive to drought. And that's why we included that for the Santa Cruz AMA.
Right. So Amanda had it exactly right. It's something we've kind of long acknowledged with Santa Cruz, that their safe yield numbers do tend to be more significantly impacted by drought conditions than some of the other AMAs because of those kind of shallow basins, because in wet years they get really significant flood recharge that in some ways is able to refill those a little bit, but it's it's certainly a very unique AMA in a lot of ways, and particularly with the impacts of drought on that AMA.
Thank you both for that. Pam Muse has commented that she thinks that the matrix is very helpful. Question here from Kristen McDuncan. She's wondering, the Phoenix AMA was in surplus from 2006 to 2010. How do you account for that?
And Amanda might be having some trouble with her microphone here. So Amanda, maybe you can chime in once you're able to get that to work. Sorry about that, everyone. And maybe Amanda, correct me if you might have responded to this a little bit differently. I think that's accounted for kind of in that long-term methodology where you might have surplus or deficit in any single given year, but when we're looking at things kind of in that smoothed line of the long-term methodology where it's a 20-year average on the natural components and three-year average on the artificial components, that might change where that annual point ends at any given time. So what we're seeing is, because of that kind of smoothing done with the long-term analysis, the surplus or deficit in any single year isn't really as relevant as kind of those long-term trends and those long-term averages. Amanda, would you have anything to correct me on or add to that?
Yep, sorry everybody, I lost my mouse there a little bit. No, I would agree with that. That especially with the 20-year averaging and the smoothing, I think that would account for that. I think you explained that well.
Great, nothing additional in the chat box right now.
Great, thank you everybody for the really good questions. I appreciate that. Oh, and it looks like we may have gotten one more in on safe yields.
Yes, thanks, Natalie. Question here from Anthony Beckham. He's wondering, do you think the long-term direction should be short-term direction, given that it only takes into account the most 3 recent years?
All right, thank you, Anthony. So I think the reason we're calling it long-term is because we use the long-term, the proposed long-term analysis to determine that metric. So it is the past 3 years, that's what we've used for the artificial average, long-term average of the, so it is overall our long-term method.
So it's kind of, given the most recent years of data, how has that long-term average changed over time is what that directionality thing is looking at. Maybe I'm not saying that in a very good way.
Yeah. All right, sort of follow-up question or comment here from Krista. She's commented, but having reached safe yield in the past seems an important thing to consider when describing the ability to reach it in the future.
Sure, Krista, and that's a great point. What we see sometimes with achieving safe yield in any given year is that it might not necessarily be reflecting actions taken by a given AMA. It might be more reflecting a particular flood year or a wet year or some other kind of external circumstance. So I certainly take your point that being close enough to get to safe yield in any given year is important. We do think that the achievability piece is a little bit reflected in kind of the percentages that Amanda supplied. I don't know if you want to go back to that grid, Amanda, related to the percentage away from safe yield according to the long-term analysis, or percent overdraft, excuse me, is the way we phrase it, as a function of groundwater demand or of total demand. So that achievability piece is definitely, we did attempt to capture that a little bit here, but perhaps there's some additional work that we can do here to kind of reflect that thought process about achievability as we further develop and finalize this grid. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Natalie. Anthony has commented, thank you. And there is nothing further in the chat box right now.
Great.
All right, I'll go ahead and pass that back to you, Natalie.
Great, thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Maggie, for both of you for those updates. So we will go ahead and move into kind of the next portion of our meeting today. And we'll be talking a little bit about our process and our ideas for drafting the fifth management plans. If we could go to the next slide, please, Amanda. So as we've come closer to 2021, we have put some time into kind of thinking about the fifth management plans, some time considering the types of things we've heard about the plans, the confusion people have had about the plans, and various pieces of feedback that we've received about the existing plans. And we've developed some goals for how we might design these fifth management plan drafts. We think that this is a really good opportunity to redesign these plans a little bit. Over time, these plans have become much more to the regulated community than just a policy and regulatory document. And we certainly respect and appreciate the value that all of that information provides in these plans. But we also want to make sure that the plans are directing people to the proper resources for various pieces of information. The plans are certainly a useful source of information, but they're not the only source of information. So in many cases, they might not be the most appropriate source of information. So we want to make sure that we're pointing people to those correct sources for the various pieces of information that they might be looking for. A lot of what you'll see reflected here on this slide comes from that. There's opportunity to rework these management plans into something that is more modern, with online tools, interactive tools, data sets and tools that can be updated and corrected over time, and something that is more accessible and more useful, with a simplified organization, some condensed chapters, references to better sources of information, and kind of laid out in a way to help demystify this thing and point people in the direction of the proper information source for various topics, rather than attempting to be an information source for all of the topics. If we could go to the next slide, please. So what you see here on the screen is an overview of the chapters in management plans for the fourth management plans and what we are considering for the fifth management plans. So in the fourth management plans, we had, depending on the plan you're looking at, there's 11 or 12 chapters in the fourth management plans. An introductory chapter that just provided some base level background on the AMA, hydrology chapter that really just covered the supply groundwater basin hydrology information, groundwater demands and supply that contained a lot of data, including kind of our water budgets around safe yield and overdraft, our kind of main regulatory chapters, ag, muni, industrial, in chapters 4, 5, and 6. Chapter 7 has been a water quality chapter, which is actually required in the statutes. There's also an underground water storage savings and replenishment chapter that does also contain a little bit of regulatory language in it. There's a chapter about the Water Management Assistance Program, or the sometimes this is referred to as the Conservation and Augmentation Funds. Chapter 10, the current Chapter 10 is an implementation chapter, which contains information about administrative reviews and things like stacking, which we may have to have a whole separate presentation on at some point. And then 11 and 12 might be different depending on the AMA that you're looking at for the fourth management plans. Tucson and Prescott had a projections chapter. That chapter was removed for the Phoenix, Pinal, and Santa Cruz AMAs. And then the final chapter in all of these plans is a water management strategy chapter. So what we're hoping to do for the fifth management plans is reorganize that a bit, streamline that a bit, maybe combine and condense some things in different ways. So what we'll be providing instead of an introduction is some kind of an executive summary. So you'll still have some background information about the AMA as a whole, but we'll also provide references to where you can find information within the plan. I think many people look at the management plans now and see this 300 some odd page document and are a little freaked out by that. We want the executive summary to be a high level view of what is contained in the plans and really a reference for where can you find things if you're looking for them in the plan. So we'll have a lot of references throughout that executive summary. For the hydrology chapter, we will combine those quality and quantity chapters. And the way that I think we'll be able to do that is we'll still have some of the hydrology information that we've historically had, but we'll also more directly, rather than trying to recreate the summaries of our groundwater models, we'll reference those groundwater models and say, hey, if you want more technical, detailed information on how these models are structured, look at the model reports. That's the correct place of information for that type of information. So we'll certainly still provide background information, but we'll also provide sources of information where you can find the more detailed technical information in the proper location from the proper source, from a more reliable source. For the supply and demand chapter, we'll maintain kind of a similar supply and demand chapter, but it might be simplified. So what we really intend to do for the fifth management plans is move a lot of the data rather than having extensive tables, extensive detailed data in the plan. The supply and demand chapter will really be a summary of the data, and the more granular, detailed data will be available on our website. So you've already seen that we've started developing dashboards and interactive tools for various pieces of data, both throughout the fifth management plans process and through some of our data transparency efforts at the department level. We want to expand on that under the fifth management plans and really provide interactive tools to access our data better, to compile it in the way or filter it in the ways that you see most relevant, to download data sets, that type of thing. We really want to make this more accessible, both in terms of kind of that interactive piece and also more available in a way that is able to be updated. That's something that we hear a lot about the data in the management plans, that it gets outdated pretty quickly. So if we move that data into an online forum, it'll be able to be updated each year. And if we discover errors in that data, we'll be able to correct those errors over time. So that's another big benefit where we weren't able to correct those types of errors in the management plans previously. The chapter 3 would then be a recharge and recovery chapter, kind of replacing the previous chapter 8. So that in the CAP AMAs, the 3 central AMAs would include a portion on the water bank, but would also carry forward information about our recharge and recovery programs here at ADWR. For chapters 4, 5, and 6, we did want to keep those in the same location. So chapter 4 will still be agriculture, chapter 5 would still be municipal, chapter 6 would still be industrial. That's really for familiarity's sake. We know that those are kind of the the nitty gritty, the really most referenced and most essential pieces of these plans. So we wanted to try to keep those in a familiar location. So those chapters, again, as I kind of talked about with the supply and the demand, a lot of that data, the very granular data that's historically been supplied in those chapters, would be moved onto an online forum. So we develop individual dashboards and data sets for each individual sector and provide those on an online forum in a way that's able to be updated rather than directly printing them and including them in the plans. This will allow those chapters to be a little bit more streamlined. We'll still provide high-level summaries of the data, but the chapters themselves will be a little bit more focused on some of the history and some of the programmatic details there. The chapter 7, the new chapter 7 here would be focused on implementation and support. So we would still have the implementation information about administrative reviews and variances and how stacking is managed on a compliance level. But we would also include in this chapter information about the Water Management Assistance Program, how grants are available in each AMA, information on how individual water users can get support from the department. We have a pretty extensive customer service function here at the department that maybe isn't widely recognized enough. People don't always reach out to us when they have questions, and they absolutely can. So we want to provide a little more information about some of those support functions and some of the administrative process support that we can provide here at the department. Making sure that people are available of the help and the tools that are available to them, both under the management plans and in annual reporting processes and things like that. The final chapter would still be a strategy chapter, but as these are the 5th management plans, we would also include a look forward. As of today, there is not currently a statutory structure for plans beyond the 5th management plans. So we want to kind of look forward. There's certainly been a lot of work doing some of this looking forward under the Governor's Council post-2025 group. So we definitely appreciate a lot of the thought and work that has gone into that group. And there's certainly some overlap in what we've seen in the 5th management plans, what we see going forward for water management in the AMAs, and the work that group has done. So yeah, a lot of work and thought will definitely go into that chapter about how we're approaching water management in the AMAs, both for the 5th management plans and looking forward beyond the 5th management plans. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as we've worked through the work group process, this concepts webpage that I keep pointing people to has been a really good example of the types of online resources that we want to make available with the 5th management plans. This is a way that we can improve our transparency. This site has been a really good tool for us in the work group to improve our transparency and communication with the stakeholders. We've gotten a lot of really good feedback about this site and the way that it makes us accessible some compiled information about the different proposals. So we want to use that kind of success as an inspiration to improve our data accessibility, our data transparency, and improve kind of the updated data that will go along with these plans. So next slide, please. So we have initial kind of stab at the types of online resources that we would have available with the 5th management plans. We would certainly love to expand on this list, and we would certainly love to expand on some of the work that we've done with the concepts page to provide up-to-date and relevant information. So we already have an AMA level supply and demand data dashboard available on our AMA data page on ADWR's website. We want to expand on that. And as I mentioned before, we want to provide sector level individual dashboards. So it would be really helpful to hear from you all on things that might be relevant for each sector, the types of data summaries that we should have for each sector within those dashboards, and the types of data sets that might be made available for each sector associated with those updated dashboards. I mentioned earlier that we did remove projections from the more recent fourth management plans. That is something that we hope to get back to, and we hope to provide those projections in an online format. The idea there of decoupling those from the management plans is similar to decoupling some of the data from the management plans, where we really want to be able to develop a broad range of scenarios. We want to be able to develop interactive tools, and we want to be able to update those assumptions and scenarios and tools over time in a more frequent manner than on kind of the management plan frequency. Similar things to what are already online. We do already have some online resources with the management plans, including the low water use plant list, supplement 1. A lot of our annual reporting forms are available online. So this move toward more online resources really just continues a trend that has been ongoing for some time. We want to just expand on what is available online, the ways we can make it most useful, the ways we can make that interactive and able to be updated over time. So we're really excited about kind of this little bit of a shift in the management plans, and we think that'll make the management plans a lot more useful from a data standpoint and a lot more accessible for understanding the regulatory structure within the management plans. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So what you see here is definitely not a hard timeline. That maybe is a theme in the timelines that we've laid out here throughout this entire process. This timeline that you see here was really more of us thinking through how, if we're able to write these plans in a year, what would we have to do? How would we be able to do this? So that's what you see here. This is definitely not a timeline that we necessarily anticipate sticking directly to. However, you can see here that in order to write these plans, 5 fifth management plans in a year's time frame, we have a lot of work ahead of us. So as I mentioned earlier, we will need to focus our staff attention on this drafting portion throughout much of 2021. We will want to largely begin wrapping up a lot of those subgroup conversations and work group development discussions kind of as soon as possible. We certainly are going to provide space to continue the conversations that we need to have. We certainly understand that those conversations cannot be rushed, that we need to fully flesh out those things. We're going to dedicate a lot of time in the first quarter of next year to have those discussions, have those conversations, continue developing those programs. But at the same time, we also are going to need to move forward and move into this drafting phase. So we will, as I mentioned, we do intend to continue having subgroup and work group meetings throughout the next year, but the sequencing, the frequency is going to change over the next year as we focus more staff energy and attention and effort on the drafting phase of these management plans. Excuse me. So we will have meetings specifically with the various subgroups to check in as the various chapters are developed. We'll want to review some of that draft language, make sure that we're reflecting appropriately the ways these conservation programs have been laid out in those public meetings, and also making sure that we're not missing anything. There is a lot of detail here, and many of you know that very, very well. So we definitely want to continue a lot of this collaborative work that has been so productive throughout this process. We want to continue that collaborative work into this drafting phase. We will also work through the AMA specific customizations that may be necessary for these conservation programs or for the plans during that drafting time. So each active management area gets its own plan. There are some customizations that may need to be done for each AMA. We have worked really hard throughout this process to develop frameworks that apply to all of the AMAs. So we are hopeful that there can be a lot of harmonization, a lot of similarities between the various AMAs, particularly with the conservation programs. But we will need to hear from all of you on the specific concerns or the specific areas that may need tailoring on an AMA level for a specific AMA. We would be happy to have individual discussions with folks about that. And if we hear enough about a particular AMA, we may schedule public AMA specific meetings to have some of those kind of tailoring conversations about a given AMA. So with that, I know that was a lot of information that I just covered. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide, and we will pause for a couple minutes here for any questions or comments or just thoughts that you have about this new structure for the fifth management plans. We're really curious to hear your feedback because we know this is a pretty significant change from what we've seen in the plans previously.
All right, thank you, Natalie. We do have quite a few questions and comments here in the chat box. I will back it up a little bit to our discussion on safe yield. Pam Muse has commented that many factors impact safe yield. Some are natural, some relate to actions taken, and some relate to the available supplies and decisions we are making as a whole regarding those supplies, such as DCP.
Yes, thank you, Pam. That's a great point. And I think that's part of why we really wanted to lay out some of those metrics in the matrix that Amanda showed. We certainly appreciate your perspective on this. And that's, I think, part of that comment really reflects why we don't want to necessarily look at any given year. There are a lot of factors that can impact safe yield in any single year. And so that long-term analysis really becomes really critical there to better understand what those longer term trends actually are, because the individual years can be really noisy due to a lot of those influences that Pam mentioned. So thank you, Pam, for that comment. I really appreciate it.
Question here from Terry Sue. She's wondering, can you make a listing of individual users by water provider to these online resources?
Sure, we can add that.
Sandra has commented that an index would be very useful in the management plans.
That is actually a great point. That was something that didn't make it into the presentation, but is on our list of things that we would like to include in these fifth management plans. So I think it's great that you mentioned that. We certainly intend to have some kind of an index. We haven't quite figured out exactly how we'll structure that, but that is something that we would really like and that we would find really useful as well for the management plan. So I am happy that you agree with that sentiment. I appreciate that, Sandra. Thank you.
Carrie Sue is wondering where in the schedule is the recharge chapter?
Good question. Thank you, Terry Sue. So you might not have seen it on the kind of monthly schedule. So the way that monthly schedule was laid out was really the chapters that I and my team are specifically going to have to draft ourselves. So if you look closely at that top line, the December line, we'll be reaching out to a lot of our internal groups across the agency to get support from various peoples across ADWR on those more specific chapters that aren't AMA specific. So you didn't see the recharge chapter on a specific month because we're going to kind of be working with our recharge group throughout the year on that chapter. Yeah, so that's I guess that kind of reflects, and maybe that's a really good point, that this is not something that is exclusively written by me and my team or anything like that. It's very much a collaborative effort across the agency, and that is a really good thing to recognize here, that this requires a lot of time and effort from a lot of different people across the agency and from the stakeholder community. So thank you for helping point that out, Terry Sue.
Thanks, Natalie. Terry Sue has also commented that she likes the recharge chapter appearing before the conservation program chapters, and Pam has commented that she agrees as well.
Great.
Pam has also commented, with the difficulties associated with the 2020 census, you may not have all the data you need in time for the 5MP. So it's good that you're going to have updatable data online as opposed to having the details in the plan.
Great. Yes, thank you, Pam. As always, I certainly appreciate your perspective on all of this. We certainly are watching things associated with the census pretty closely. Some of that data is going to be really critical in terms of particularly related to the municipal program in updating those service area populations. So we certainly are watching that closely and hoping for the best with the availability of that data. But you're absolutely right that there may need to be some revisions to that data over time, depending on the outcome of that data availability.
Thanks, Natalie. Krista McJunkin is wondering, what is entailed in the Safe Yield paper and when will it be available for review?
That is a really great question. And something I think we'll need to talk more about in our Safe Yield subgroup meeting. So we have not drafted that paper yet. We have kind of a rough outline for it at this point, but we're definitely still kind of in initial phases for that. And Amanda, maybe you can chime in here if there's anything I miss here. What we're hoping to capture in that paper is really a lot of the things that we've covered in that Safe Yield group. So methodology, what each of the components are, things that might be improved upon in the future, how the long-term analysis is done, and an assessment of where each AMA stands with regard to its goal. So we definitely have some work ahead of us for that paper. I don't necessarily have a timeline for that or anything, but we certainly are hoping to get a report out kind of from the work that that group has done. The nuances of safe yield, just, I mean, I don't think that can be overstated. So it's certainly a very complicated thing. There's certainly a lot of things that could be included in that paper. But I think we're still open to suggestion on other things we might be able to focus on in that paper, and how we might develop that paper over time. But we do, as Krista kind of is alluding to here, we've mentioned several times at this point that we do intend to publish a report kind of as a work product of that safe yield subgroup. So thank you, Krista.
Thank you, Natalie. Nothing further in the chat box at this time.
Great. And maybe I'll just check in with Amanda. Amanda, is there anything that you would add to that safe yield report summary that I provided, or is there anything missed there?
No, I don't think so. I think that we had also maybe talked about kind of the future, like kind of looking into the future for safe yield, and what that kind of looks like is something that we are probably going to include in that paper as well.
Yes, perfect. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Good. All right. Anything else?
Krista has commented, thank you. And nothing else in the chat box.
All right. So we made it to the closing section. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. As we mentioned earlier, we do have kind of our next quarter's worth of subgroup meetings on the public meetings calendar and on the Fifth Management Plans page at this point. So please make plans to attend those. Please let us know if there are additional topics or additional offline discussions that we can have in preparation for those meetings. We do really appreciate the engagement that we've had throughout this process and all of the participation that we've had in these meetings. If we could go to the next slide, please. Actually, I think the next slide might just be a closing slide. So please, as I keep mentioning, we would love for you to all take a look at our concepts page. All of our upcoming meetings are available also on our website. Please fill out the questionnaire if you have any additional comments or questions, or just want to write something down in our questionnaire. We would really appreciate any additional feedback that you might be able to provide. Looks like McKenna did drop that link into the chat box. We get a lot of really, really useful information from those questionnaires, and have been able to use a lot of that information to make changes and develop and shift our thinking on how these conservation programs are coming together. So we very much appreciate all of the engagement, the comments that we receive in these meetings, the comments that we receive through that questionnaire, the conversations that we have with all of you offline. I guess I just want to say that we do truly, truly appreciate all of the time that you all have taken over the last year and a half as we've worked through this process. Moving into virtual forums, we know there have been a lot of challenges associated with that. And really just the challenge of wading through the weeds of all of this data and these programs and these proposals with us. We really appreciate your time and your feedback and your engagement throughout all of this. We know these are difficult conversations, and you all have been phenomenal partners in all of that. We do look forward to continuing this work with all of you in this coming year, in this next phase of drafting these plans. So I think we, again, have a lot of work cut out for us, but we have a good path forward for us, and we're really looking forward to seeing how these plans come together. So with that, if we have no more questions, I'd really like to thank you for your participation, for your engagement throughout this process, for your willingness to teach us, to help us to understand the nuances of the various sectors and how we can move these programs forward. So I hope you all stay healthy, that you all have wonderful holidays, and we will see you all in the new year. Thank you.